Hello everyone, welcome to the Breadbox. This video is the first video of this channel and I want to set the tone to things to come on and what you can expect from me on this channel. Now for the introduction. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm going to quote Jensen Franklin and say it doesn't matter who I am, or if you know who I am. Do you know Jesus? That's what I am most concerned about. Now I get the question a lot, who is this channel going to be for? That's a simple answer. This channel is for everybody. If you are an imperfect person, struggling, and just trying to do your best, but still struggling, this channel's for you. If you believe that you are perfect and you don't really think that you have any flaws, this channel's still for you. Basically, this channel is for everybody. Everybody is welcome here. However, I do have one ground rule. I encourage the discussion of the difficult things on this channel. You're welcome to ask questions. You're welcome to have discussions back and forth in the comment section. I have no problem with that. The one thing that I will have a problem with is when people get disrespectful. We are three-dimensional, simple creatures walking around Earth trying to make sense of a perfect, infinitely dimensional God. None of us have all the answers. None of us know everything. And I expect us to act as such. So that there are boundaries, because when you have a relationship with no boundaries, there's a fancy word for that. It's called hell. Speaking of all of us and what we are, I believe that the Church of Jesus Christ, it is not called, or we are not called just to go to heaven when we die. I believe that that's a cool part of it, but that's not the whole thing. Actually, that's kind of a minor thing. Instead, we are called to bring heaven to every place that we see hell on earth. And that could be someone who needs a meal, or a teenager who's trying to get to school and has to ride a bike in the rain. Give them a ride to school. Little things like that bring heaven to everywhere you see hell. If you have a neighbor, let's say, who maybe is a single mom and she's doing her best, but every time you see her, she's worn out, she's stressed, she doesn't know where she's going to get her next meal, buy her coffee. Coffee's cheap. Go over and just talk with her. You don't have to really say anything. Just say, "Hey, how you doing?" Hey, just find some kind of common interest, just to bring heaven to that situation. And do not. I'm getting off on a tangent here, but basically what I'm trying to say is, if you see a need that you can meet it. You don't have to announce Jesus every single time that you do it. Actually, you don't have to say anything. Just say, "Hey, so I met it. But this is my kindness to you." That's all you have to say. Eventually, they'll come around and ask. This part's going to be a little rough, but it needs to be said. And I think I've already touched on it a little bit, but it bears repeating. If you are the church know-it-all, and I mean the Church of Jesus Christ, the church as a whole, people, not a building. If you are the know-it-all and you have figured God out and you cornered the market on truth, please allow me to relieve you of that responsibility, because you are wrong. And so am I, and so is everybody else. Again, we are three-dimensional creatures, imperfect creatures, trying to make sense of an infinitely dimensional, perfect God. I said that again because it goes hand in hand with what I'm trying to say. None of us are even remotely going to know everything on this side of the ground, or on this side of heaven. Because as the Bible says, no man can see God and know about everything about him and live. Back to everyone else. This is not your one-stop shop for the Word of God. There are tons of other people that whose videos you can watch, and you can listen to what they have to say. And you can, maybe, go back and forth between what I have to say and what they have to say, and it combine and be a revelation of something you never thought about. Basically, what I'm saying is like, if you watch this channel, great. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. However, I don't have all the answers, and other people could have the second part of an answer that I have. So don't get all of your knowledge, and don't get your word from one place. Please go to your church body, and but also get be very diverse in your knowledge base. But it's not really a good way to say what I'm trying to say, but I think that's the best way to put it. This video is titled Foundations, just because I am setting, like I said in the beginning of the intro, I'm setting the tone for what you're going to see on this channel. And some concepts have to be talked about before we can go any farther. So, the first concept is historical context. And what I mean by that is anytime you read a piece of literature, the older it is, the more this becomes very important. Whenever you read that piece of literature, ask three questions. Who wrote it? Who was it written to? And how would the reader have taken it? And I'm going to use the book of Exodus, particularly up to chapter 20, which is where the Ten Commandments are at, as the basis of making my point. So in Exodus, we all know the basics of the story. You have, I'd say, 2 million Jewish people who were slaves in Egypt. They started out as a family of 12 sons plus Jacob in Egypt. So 13 people and various wives and children that were already born. 13 people going to Egypt. They multiplied over 500 years, or nearly 500 years, into what we know as the nation of Israel, because they all descended from Jacob or Israel. Now, they had been beaten. They had pretty much all of their property taken just because they were slaves. Their slave drivers would, do whatever they wanted to them with no repercussions whatsoever. And the person that all of the slave masters in Egypt called, well, one of the gods that they had, there was Ra and the Pharaoh and a few others, but they considered Pharaoh God. And so, and this is going to come into play in just a few minutes, but they would talk to, they saw where the slave masters would get orders from Pharaoh, and then the slave masters would carry it out, or make the Jews carry it out. So then Moses comes along and says, "Hey, check it out. A little bit. You're gonna see a little bit of stuff go on, and then we're gonna get out of here." And everybody is like, "Okay, whatever." And it was not a pleasant experience, but over the course of the next week or two, they see these miraculous wonders happen. Water turns to blood. Locusts eat all of the Egyptian crops. Let's see. All the firstborns of Egypt die, but except for the Jews who followed a very short but very specific set of instructions. All of these things happen, and then Moses is like, "Hey, guys, it's time. Let's get out of here." And so then they walk. They see the Red Sea split, and we think about this in a 2023, usually Western mindset. Most of us that are watching this channel have never been slaves. We've never been basically beaten within an inch of our life. We haven't been killed. Our stuff hasn't been taken by a slave master. None of us have ever had a slave master forcibly have intercourse with us. Our children haven't been taken and thrown into fire to please somebody else's god. All of these things did not happen to us, so we have to think about how would they have taken it, or how would they have, been responding to what they saw. And the Red Sea and the plagues, but I personally think that the Red Sea is definitely more so than the plagues, because they saw something that was incredible, and it was exactly what they needed at the time because the Egyptians were chasing them out of Egypt, trying to get them back or kill them. So they see this sea split, and they walk, through the Red Sea on dry ground, and then they get through the Red Sea. They keep on walking. They come to this giant mountain, and this is where we're going to camp out here for a second, because you have a million, 2 million Jews, the nation of Israel, standing at the base of this mountain. Guy that told you that you're going to be leaving, then pulled it off, goes up in the mountain, and it's from what I've read and in books and everything, it takes 8 hours to walk up Mount Sinai, and then 8 hours to walk back down. So at least 16 hours these people are waiting to see what Moses has to say, because he said he was going up on the mountain to talk to God. He comes back down with his 2 stone tablets, and we, in our 2023 mindset, say, okay, those are 10 rules or 10 conditions for God to love man. If you break one of the rules, then God doesn't love you as much. The truth of it is that the 10 Commandments are actually 10 proofs that God does already loves man, and he's developing a relationship. I want to talk about a few of the 10 Commandments individually because it kind of hammers that point home. Like I said, they were slaves in Egypt, and they were subject to masters and a Pharaoh who thought he was a deity himself, and they had no property rights, they had no dignity of their own, and they were considered less than human. So with that in mind, the 10 Commandments say this. The first one, I am the Lord your God. Okay, cool. And then he says, have no other gods before me. So he's saying, don't have any other gods before me. He's saying what I say trumps whatever Ra says, or any other god, not necessarily Ra or Pharaoh or any one specific. He's like, what I say is above them. And then he goes on to say things like, don't steal. Now, God is in the process of setting up this new culture, new way to live, so that the Jewish people can prosper. And in the old way, in Egypt, somebody could just come and take your stuff because they were bigger than you and stronger than you, and they had a whip and they could beat you with it. Well, in this new way of living, this new culture they were trying to establish, God says, don't steal from each other. You don't have to live like that anymore. Don't do it. And then he says, don't covet your neighbor's wife. And then he also says, don't covet what your neighbor has. Don't as they say in the South, don't develop a hankering for it. So don't covet whatever your neighbor has. You have your own stuff. It's yours. It belongs to you. What they have is theirs. It belongs to them. You don't have to have a desire for their stuff, because you have your own property rights. There's so much more to the 10 Commandments than what is written in the modern day English Bible. So, and then I'm not going to go through all of them, but this is one that I so dearly love, because it just tells them, the Jews, the complete 180 that God's trying to do from what they had experienced in Egypt. Various multiple generations for over 500, or excuse me, nearly 500 years. What they experienced, He's completely changing it. Okay. And people use this today, this commandment, or this one of the 10 Commandments, to berate people and put them down. Okay. And it's this one. Can observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And if you read further in that particular one, it says, you shall do no work on that day. They just came from Egypt, and they had not had a day off in 500 years. Nobody had ever said you have to take a day off. It's part of our culture. You were taking a day off. It's a command. You do it. Now, granted, in the Ten Commandments in Hebrew, the word command is nowhere in there. It's like a suggestion. The entire Torah is God's standard for the best way to live. So it's like, hey, it's a pretty good idea. You might want to do it. And can we all agree that I'd say one day in seven, take a day off? You know, disconnect from everything. Don't, you can keep your phone with you, whatever, but you don't have to answer emails. You don't have to answer your phone. If you want to keep it with you, just for emergencies, if your car breaks down or something, that's fine. But you don't have to do anything on that day. And not to go too far into it, but scientists have done experiments where in zoos where they put animals on display 7 days in a week, and then other animals they got one day off in 6 days, and the one that got one day off in 6 days flourished, and the other ones, they were so worn out they just laid around in their enclosures and didn't do anything. So again, not to go too far into that, but it's a good idea, and God's like, you don't have to work yourself to death. How many of us are guilty of that from time to time, even in 2023? Going back to my original point, God was setting up a culture where we didn't have to live as slaves to anything anymore. And if we don't consider historical context of what is being said and how the nation of Israel would have taken it, we miss the entire thing, and we wind up holding people to a standard that's unachievable. Nobody is ever going to keep all that stuff. I have it. I don't know anybody that has. So consider historical arc whenever you're reading something, whether Bible or any other old piece of literature. Try your best to put yourself in that mindset, because it will change the way you are reading the piece of literature, and it can also give you a better insight into what the author is trying to say. The second concept that we're going to talk about today is the law of firsts. Everybody's heard the expression that you never get a chance to you never get a second chance to make a first impression. Once that first impression is set in somebody's mind, you have to work really, 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 really hard to get that impression of you out of their mind and show them the real you, and so that the real you is the impression that they get. So the law of first is very important. Whenever you are reading the Bible, I want you to consider, we'll take prayer for instance. Prayer is all through the Bible, okay? The first mention of prayer, there's all these kinds of ideas that are talked about today and how to do it and when to do it and all this other kind of stuff. But, the very first mention of the idea of prayer comes from Genesis 4:26. And that says that finally the men began to call upon the name of the Lord. And the way that gives you the idea of the original idea behind prayer is that they had turned away from their own ability or their own faith in their own ability to do various different things. And they turned to the one who could actually carry the burden that they could not carry, and they knew it. So that is the very idea of prayer showing up in the Bible the very first time. And that defined every other mention of it afterwards. I will cover that in a later video, much more in depth, but that is the basic concept behind it, is they turned and faced the one who could bear the burden. And I'll give you another example of when Jesus is walking along with the disciples and he sees a fig tree. And he looks at the fig tree and it doesn't have any figs on it, and he curses it. And the Bible actually says, and all of the disciples saw and understood. Understood what? He got mad at a tree and cursed it and it withered up and, went with the wind? What in the world is going on there? If you take into account the law of first mention, everybody knows the first mention of a fig leaf in the Bible is Genesis with Adam and Eve. And in Jesus' day, it says there was no fruit, there was only leaves. So go all the way back to the garden. They sin and they try to cover up themselves with fig leaves, and they weren't able to do it. They failed. So the concept of what Jesus is trying to say is man, a fig leaf basically represents man's attempt to cover his own sin, cover his own shame. There was no fruit on the tree. Man's attempt to cover himself is fruitless. If you don't consider the if you don't consider the law of first mention, you don't get that, and it just confuses you, because I know it did for me for many, many years, until somebody was like, yeah, it's fig leaves back in the garden. I was like, oh, that makes sense. And one little extra tidbit is the first invention of man was a needle to try to sew the fig leaves together to cover their nakedness and their shame. Man used a needle to try to cover their shame and failed. God used 3 nails to cover their shame with the crucifixion of Christ, and he succeeded. So then, one of the big questions of the entire Bible becomes the needle or the nail. I'm going to let that sink in for a second while I read my notes. The final thing that I'd like to talk about in this video, and it being foundations, is the foundation of my own faith and where I came from, spiritually speaking. There are quite a few people who I can credit for influencing me and teaching me and things like that. However, the person who probably has had the biggest impact on me is a man named Shane Willard. And I want to basically introduce you to him and send you to his website. You can listen to talks he has. He has a bunch of talks on YouTube from various different churches that he's been to. And on his website, he also has CDs, direct downloads of talks and series that he's done. And he uses the profit from that and maybe the gifts that people just randomly give without getting anything back. But in any case, he uses the profit from those sets, the selling those CDs and DVDs and stuff like that to people. Use the profit for that to help out mentally handicapped orphans in China. He has 3 orphanages in China, and his ministry has also been recognized by the last time I heard, by the I believe it's the Department of Justice in Cape Town, South Africa, as a viable option to pull instead of going to Pollsmoor Prison, which, by what I read and the things that I've read about it, is one of the worst prisons in the world. So they get them job trained, they get them off of drugs, get them out of gangs and stuff like that. I feel it's a noble cause, and going along with his mission that he has set up for his ministry, he has said, as I said at the very beginning of this video, we Christians are not called just to go to heaven when we die. We are called to bring heaven to every place that we see hell on earth until we die. I will link his website in the in the video description. I highly encourage you to go and take part in his ministry. And if you just give a gift, that's fine. But if you listen to what the man has to say, he has a very different perspective on teaching, on the word, and how it all correlates to the way we live in the world today. And I want to thank you very, very much for watching this video. This is it. This is Foundations. This is going to be the first of many videos on this channel. I highly encourage you to get subscribed, stick around. It's not for my own edification. I don't, if you don't, then peace be with you. I love you anyway. But I really feel like this is the next stage of my journey, and what I am called to do is make this YouTube channel, because at one point I did actually write a blog, and somebody asked me one time, they said, why don't you start making YouTube videos about the things that you write? Because, and they were like, well, people will sit down and watch a video versus or more likely they will than reading a blog. And I said, well, maybe it's time for that, because I wrote the blog for about 3 years and it got a lot of good traction. And so this is the next step. And I hope that you guys will join me on this journey. So far, I'm having a lot of fun with it. I have a Facebook page. I don't have any other social media for the page yet, but things will be coming. More videos are coming, and I invite you guys to come along for the ride. And until next time, seek justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with God. Bye.